Good evening, welcome to Ben TV. I'm Steve Pereira, and on Quedia today, our show on culture and media, we're looking at spoken word artists, some of whom have performed at Midsummer. Today with us for the first time we have John Stevens. Welcome, John, to Ben TV.
Thanks, great to be here.
Now, John, you're a librarian?
Yes, I am. I'm a reference and research librarian, so I answer reference questions for people. I also do collection building work, a bit of cataloguing, a bit of sorting, that kind of stuff.
Falling to the stereotypes of librarians, you have a very deep...
We're very strange. Yes, no, my secret life, it's part of my secret is not a secret. Obviously, I'm an out transvestite. It's hard actually to be a transvestite and actually remain in the closet without it being quite literal. So everybody at work, everybody who comes into work knows that I am. Probably my secret is probably my interest in death metal and black metal and quite anti-social music. Death metal is, if you can imagine the usual kind of loud sort of like Black Sabbath kind of music that started off from there in the 60s, but this is something that's much faster, it's more guttural. If you imagine like the possessed child in Exorcist, that kind of vocals. Generally the lyrics are quite dark, generally quite violent, sometimes quite blasphemous as well, and there's a lot of things that got them into the genre into a lot of trouble in the 80s, particularly in the Bible Belt in America. There were a few law cases and stuff that happened around then, but yeah.
So is that the appeal, that it is transgressive? And
I find the transgressive aspect quite good. I like engaging with it as sort of a kind of a way of sorting through emotions and experiences that you wouldn't otherwise do, because it's quite in a fantasy realm. Some people within the genre are known for seeing it not as being a fantasy realm and taking things too far, but nowadays there's a lot of people who've thought about it, deconstructed it, and it's actually quite an interesting art form to explore these days.
So how does that inform your artwork? What do you take from that to inform the way that you...
I think in a way that I find my work to be quite direct and quite honest. I think it's being an out transvestite, you have to deal with a lot of anxiety and a lot of other people's aggression and misunderstanding and so forth. And so often some of the ways I do that, it's like I'm often listening to incredibly loud, aggressive music when I'm out in public. It helps me get through some times when I otherwise feel quite self-conscious. But it also, I find it quite empowering, as much as like with all these quite negative aspects to the music, I find I sort of getting the things that kind of make me feel a bit stronger out of it, and that helps me get through in situations when many years ago I just wouldn't have had the courage to do so.
Do you have to find yourself battling the stereotype about the angry transvestite? We all, in popular cinema medium, we've always got the angry, bitter. And Silence of the Lambs is a classic case of that.
Well, no. I think that's more than just angry and bitter. That's the serial killer transvestite, and which is something that I do feel is still quite regularly out there, and also the transvestite who is played for laughs. And those are things, especially working in a very public role, I find presents a lot of problems. I'm really good at making eye contact with people, which is unfortunate because often the eyes tell so much, and I get really frustrated at constantly seeing these reactions with people. But the flip side of that is when I start to help people, I see that reaction change really quickly, and then after a while they realise they actually have to engage with me as a person, and so seeing how quickly people can nevertheless overcome these preconceptions about transvestites and so forth in public, because I consider myself to be, despite everything, quite approachable. But
the other curious thing about, when I asked you for your bio, you described yourself as being unfortunately heterosexual.
Yes. That was because many years ago I actually had to come out as being heterosexual, because believe it or not, in the late 90s in country Victoria, which is where I grew up, the goth and metalhead friends of mine, it was sort of a thing to be identified as bi, and so for a while I thought, well, I like wearing skirts and makeup, so I guess I must be bi, and so I adopted that identity for a while, and hooked up with a few guys and stuff, and was trying to convince myself for a very long time that I was, and then eventually had to go, no, actually I'm not, and it was actually a really depressing experience coming out, because, for one, it was awkward. Some close friends just sort of laughed and said, "Oh, you're great, John. That's amazing." But in other situations, it was just, well, there's so much about the heterosexual community that's terrible. And I really didn't like wanting to suddenly have to discover this amazing, terrible legacy that has been, all the way through history as a result of all these like negative aspects of dominant heterosexuality in our culture. And so having to realize like, oh God, this is me.
But this is a piece that John's going to perform for us. It's about the terrible job he had before going to library school and discovering that he's quite outgoing.
A few weeks before finishing up my job in the babyware section of Maya, my manager was catching up with me to let me know how much of a disappointment I had been. My job apparently started promisingly enough 4 months earlier. I was, at first, enlisted to bring traumatised children down a dimly lit corridor decorated with styrofoam reindeer heads to a badly ventilated room, where they were then made to sit on the knee of a large stranger whose face was obscured by cushion stuffing, as the rest of their family laughed at all their attempts to escape to the relative safety of the Lego room. For some reason, I didn't take to this the way they had expected. When I mentioned to my manager that I was going back to uni to become a librarian, she said, "Good, working with people really isn't your thing." A few years on, I came to the conclusion that I'm an extrovert, fundamentally unhappy and full of anxieties and uncertainties about the future, but strangely happier around people. A third of my time at work is spent approaching people like a wide-eyed gopher saying, "Hi, can I help you?" with a frightening level of sincerity. Before I realised how addicted I was getting to customer service delivery, I used to joke with colleagues about how awful it would be if you left work with your information badge still on. Worse still, what if you couldn't remove it? You'd walk into public toilets with your eyes down, and after a while you'd just get used to saying, "Maybe they're in another toilet block," or "I don't know why it's red." I stopped joking about it around the time I realised, given a world of options on the streets of Melbourne, badge or not, I'm regularly one of the first folk people will approach if they need directions somewhere. And I'm not approachable really. I'll be wearing sunglasses if there isn't a hint of vitamin D around me. My earbuds will regularly be full of carcass and disembowelment, and my off-day t-shirts are frequently violent and or satanic. But that just seems to make people more insistent, which is okay. I like it really. Like, I remember a couple of months back, I was taking the tram to the city early on a Friday afternoon to make some badges at Sticky. I hadn't pre-cut any of the designs, though, so I was scissoring them as quickly as I could. It's a long journey, but also a bit bumpy at times, so I had to pay attention. Somewhere going through North Fitzroy, an elderly couple sat next to me. One of them was trying to get my attention for a while, but for some reason, I wasn't in the mood. Eventually, though, I paused, took my buds out, and did the gopher thing. "You must have really steady hands," she said, grinning widely. I laughed. "Not really." "Oh, I could never do that," she insisted. I paused. Well, I've done a lot of cutting in my time.
Thank you. That was John Stevens reading from us from an extract from his performance space. You've been on Quedia. Thank you very much for joining us. See you next time.